Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're looking closely at Frederick Taylor Gates.
Right. Maybe not a household name for everyone, but absolutely pivotal.
Yeah, senior business and philanthropic advisor to John D. Rockefeller Sr. Our main source is his autobiography, Chapters in My Life.
And what a story. I mean, his journey is pretty remarkable.
It really is. He starts from, well, a relatively poor background, spends a decade as a Baptist minister after Rochester.
And ends up becoming this major force shaping modern American philanthropy, advising one of the wealthiest people in history. Quite the leap.
Exactly. So our mission today is to, pull out the key takeaways from his life and his writings.
We'll look at things like his career changes,
Right.
which were pretty significant.
And his business sense, his ideas on effective philanthropy.
Even his views on raising children, which are quite insightful.
Think of this as sort of a shortcut to understanding some valuable lessons from a really remarkable life.
Sounds good.
Okay, so let's start right at the beginning. How does a Baptist minister end up in Rockefeller's inner circle?
Well, the key moment seems to be his fundraising work. He was trying to raise money for a Baptist university in Chicago.
Ah, and that's how he crossed paths with Rockefeller.
Exactly. And apparently Rockefeller was, immediately struck by Gates's sharpness.
His acumen and common sense, right.
Yeah, that first impression was strong. Strong enough that it eventually led to Gates becoming his go-to business advisor.
There's that anecdote, too, from even earlier showing his proactive nature.
Oh, the Pillsbury story.
Yeah, while he was still preaching in Minnesota, Mr. Pillsbury comes to him about his will.
And Gates, always thinking of the Baptist cause, doesn't just nod along.
No, he suggests a huge gift, like $50,000.
Which was a lot of money then.
Definitely. But with a catch, the church had to match it.
And then the clincher, Gates says he'll personally spend a year raising the matching funds.
Wow. Talk about initiative.
Yeah.
And persuasion.
It really highlights his style, doesn't it? He didn't just wait for things to happen. He shaped the deal and put himself on the line to make it work.
Totally committed.
You see that dedication again later.
Right. Which leads him to the American Baptist Education Society's executive board.
And from there, he's central to the talks with Rockefeller about starting what became the University of Chicago.
And Rockefeller clearly saw his value, naming him a trustee.
Yep. And Gates jumps right in, fundraising, helping lead the new university.
So he wasn't just an advisor, he was actively building things.
Very much so. He worked closely with the first president, Dr. Harper. They were both ambitious, maybe sometimes too ambitious for Rockefeller.
Ah, so there were occasional differences about expansion, spending.
Yeah, Harper especially had huge plans, and sometimes they clashed a bit with Rockefeller's, let's say, more cautious financial approach. It's that classic tension.
Big vision versus the bottom line. Makes sense.
And that role eventually leads to the next big shift.
The move to New York.
Exactly. To focus entirely on Rockefeller's growing philanthropy. That was the definitive move away from the ministry.
Okay, so now he's managing the money, directing the giving, overseeing the organizations.
And this is where he makes, arguably, his most lasting mark. He becomes the champion for scientific giving.
Scientific giving. Okay, let's unpack that. What did he mean by that exactly?
Well, it was a pretty radical shift at the time. He pushed to move away from what he called retail giving.
Retail giving, like small donations here and there.
Yeah, individual gifts, local charities, that sort of thing. He advocated for wholesale philanthropy.
Wholesale. So bigger, more strategic.
Precisely. Focusing resources on carefully chosen public agencies. Institutions that could tackle problems on a large scale. Systemic change.
So less about just putting out fires and more about fixing the faulty wiring, so to speak.
That's a great way to put it. Evidence-based, aiming for root causes, measurable impact.
And you really can see that influence today, can't you?
Yeah.
Major foundations that focus on outcomes.
Absolutely. That strategic, data-driven approach. A lot of that DNA goes back to Gates. It really changed the whole landscape of large-scale giving.
What's fascinating, though, is that he didn't really have a formal business background at this stage.
Right. But Rockefeller trusted him implicitly. He talked about Gates's great store of common sense.
And Gates himself believed in that, didn't he? That common sense, applied diligently, could solve complex problems.
He really did. He felt it was often the most powerful tool, and his track record seemed to bear that out.
Yeah, which brings us nicely to his actual business advice and how he helped Rockefeller avoid some tricky situations.
Like helping him get out of bad investments.
Exactly, especially those involving that syndicate. Rockefeller's friends and associates, right? Whose ventures weren't always sound.
Yeah, Gates approached these things very differently. Much more cautious, much more research-driven.
The Colorado mining investment is the perfect example, isn't it?
Oh, definitely. It really shows his method.
So tell us about that. How did he handle it?
Well, faced with this mining opportunity, Gates first admitted he knew nothing about mining. He said, "My self-distrust proved my salvation." He wouldn't rely on his own assessment.
Smart. So what did he do?
He went straight to the experts, talked to experienced, reliable miners and engineers in Denver, people who actually knew the business, knew the ground.
And they told him.
They told him the whole thing was basically a fraud. There was no gold. Rockefeller's investment was based on, well, nothing real.
Wow. So he saved Rockefeller potentially a fortune just by asking the right questions of the right people.
Exactly. And that incident was huge for their relationship.
I bet.
After that, Rockefeller didn't just trust Gates with philanthropy. He made him his independent agent for his personal investments, too.
That's a massive level of trust based on demonstrated competence and, well, common sense.
Precisely. His judgment, his method.
Okay, so we've seen his impact on business, on philanthropy. Let's shift gears a bit to something more personal. His ideas on raising children, where did those come from?
Mostly from his own reflections in his autobiography. And right away, you see this strong belief in the power of early childhood.
He thought those first years were incredibly formative.
Absolutely. He felt they deeply shape character and ultimately how a person's life turns out.
He also seemed to favor a gentler approach to discipline.
Yeah, he talked about courtesy being more effective than harsh rebukes if you want to raise, gentlemen and women.
Less about fear, more about respect.
Exactly. He believed real parenting success wasn't just about forcing compliance through fear.
What was it then?
It was about engaging the child's own reason and conscience, leading them to what he called intelligent voluntary repentance.
That's a thoughtful way to put it. Intelligent voluntary repentance.
Yeah. It implies understanding and internal change, not just external obedience.
He also seemed big on open communication in the family.
Very much so. Even encouraging kids to pray in their own sincere words.
And he had some thoughts on religious upbringing based on his own experience, right?
Yes, he felt that fear-based religious teaching could actually be harmful, stifling,
As opposed to
nurturing ideals lovingly. He thought that's what builds a strong conscience and real character, not the fear of punishment.
That makes sense. He also valued family discussions, even about difficult things.
Yeah, talking openly about troubles, relationships.
Yeah.
He saw that as a way to impart practical, worldly wisdom. Builds trust, too, I imagine.
Definitely. And positive reinforcement.
He was a big believer in that. Praise, encouragement. He saw how effective they were in motivating children, building that internal drive.
And he passed on advice from his own mother.
Yes, some really timeless stuff about diligence.
Like what?
Like the importance of always striving to do your best no matter the task. Whether you think it's important or not, whether you think you're naturally good at it or not, just give it your all.
That's solid advice for anyone, really.
It is. He also described their overall approach as training for self-governance.
How did they do that?
Through love, advice, persuasion, encouragement, rewards, trying to avoid just issuing commands or prohibitions.
So, guiding rather than dictating?
Right. Though he did admit it was sometimes challenging for the kids. They occasionally just wanted to be told what to do. But the goal was developing self-control through practice.
Interesting. They also valued culture, particularly music.
Yes, he considered exposure to good music a really valuable inheritance, maybe even more so than money alone.
And on education generally, beyond formal schooling.
He pushed for balance. Learning from books, yes, but also lots of self-directed activity, both mental and physical. Provide the tools and resources at home. Let them explore their interests.
Right, fostering curiosity. Okay, let's circle back to his broader views on business and philanthropy. He had this idea about continuous improvement.
Yeah, that constant striving to get better ultimately means less competition and bigger rewards.
Right.
It's about raising your own bar.
A powerful principle. He also acknowledged mistakes are part of learning.
Definitely. He saw errors and challenges as basically necessary steps when you're taking on new responsibilities. You can't avoid them if you're growing.
He even learned from tough early jobs, right? That Scrooge-like boss.
Gister Smith, yeah.
Yeah.
Standing up for himself actually earned the guy's trust.
And taught him practical skills, banking, bookkeeping.
Which, as we saw, came in very handy later on.
Absolutely. He also stressed clear communication.
Critical skill. Being able to explain your ideas well to a broad audience.
And he was a fan of Benjamin Franklin's view on time.
Yes, but he expanded it. Time isn't just money. It's also potential for mental growth, building reputation, gaining influence, achieving success.
So don't waste it, but also don't rush things unnecessarily.
Exactly. He warned against rushing. Lasting impact takes time.
And his fundraising approach reflected that patience too.
Very much. Focus on the relationship, on gratitude, not just grabbing the biggest check right now. Build long-term support.
Okay, now this next part I find really fascinating, his insight into medical research.
Yeah, this was huge. He looked around and saw medicine lagging. Why?
Underfunding, lack of focus.
Basically, yes, not enough consistent money or institutional support for pure research compared to other sciences.
So what was his solution?
Endowed research programs.
Yeah.
Specifically within universities. He saw that as the engine for real scientific breakthroughs in medicine.
And he convinced Rockefeller of this.
He played a major role, yes, pushing for this area to be a philanthropic priority.
Which led directly to the Rockefeller Institute.
It did. And Gates' vision for it was, well, incredibly ambitious. Universal, even.
Universal. How so?
He saw its purpose as transcending individuals, communities, nations, addressing the fundamental human need for health, benefits for everyone, for generations. As wide as the race, he put it.
Wow. Powerful vision.
No wonder it got flooded with appeals then.
Right. He called it a benevolent black hole.
It just shows the immense need, but also the potential power of focused philanthropy.
And Gates also pushed Rockefeller to think beyond his own background.
Yeah, beyond just the Baptist denomination, beyond just the U.S. supporting worthy causes globally.
He also worried about the sheer size of the Rockefeller fortune, didn't he? The impact on descendants.
He did. He was concerned it could be a burden, even harmful.
So his solution was?
Advocate strongly for creating these large, permanent philanthropic organizations. Endowments focus on broad societal progress.
Did he suggest specific areas?
Oh, yeah. Higher education, medical research, definitely, but also fine arts, scientific agriculture, promoting Christian ethics, civic virtue, a wide range.
And Rockefeller eventually stepped back from the day-to-day decisions.
Largely, yes, to minimize personal bias, maximize the impact. A pretty significant move.
Gates seemed to think Rockefeller wasn't motivated by praise anyway.
Right, more by the joy of achievement itself. Intrinsic motivation.
And for Gates, what was a standout success?
He often pointed to the Sanitary Commission's work on hookworm. Eradicating that debilitating disease had a massive impact.
It's interesting you mentioned Rockefeller didn't give much direct praise. How did that affect Gates?
Gates apparently wasn't driven by that. His motivation was to earn approval through the work, through the results, not by seeking personal gain or compliments.
Makes sense. He also gave us a peek into Rockefeller's investment style.
Yeah, described him as following the market, not trying to control it, and using his huge holdings to help stabilize things during panics by lending securities.
A stabilizing force. And Rockefeller, in turn, thought very highly of Gates.
Exceptionally highly. He recognized that rare combination Gates had sharp business mind and deep philanthropic insight, a unique blend.
And underpinning it all for Gates was this belief in progress through knowledge.
Yes, a fundamental belief in human perfectibility, driven by advancing our understanding of the world.
A principle he shared with Rockefeller.
And they also shared the management philosophy. Find good people, then give them the freedom to do their jobs. Trust and autonomy.
Gates made another observation, one that feels quite relevant now, about society's focus on equality.
Right. He wondered if, as society pushes more towards equality and uniformity, the responsibility for really fostering pluralism, different approaches, and the pursuit of excellence might shift more onto the private sector.
Interesting thought. Worth pondering.
Definitely. Shifting gears again slightly, he shared some other personal bits, too, like his own schooling.
Yeah, he didn't actually enjoy formal school much.
No, but he found things he loved working with wood, music, which led him to think education should follow the child's nature, their inclinations.
Makes sense. And his advice on reading.
Be selective. Read actively. Engage deeply with useful books. Don't just passively consume everything.
Good advice. He also had that interesting observation about temptation.
That it often comes from our strengths, not just our weaknesses. A bit counterintuitive, maybe.
Yeah, like the temptation for brilliant people to prioritize being original over being truthful.
Exactly. He also warned against friction.
Friction, meaning?
Things like worry, envy, pointless arguments.
Yeah.
He saw them as a complete waste of energy. Drains focus.
Good point. Avoid the drama.
Pretty much. And avoid the habit of omniscience.
The need to seem like you know everything.
Yeah. Be open to suggestions, to criticism, no matter how expert you become. Stay humble enough to learn.
He even said he felt he knew less about the Bible later in life.
which probably meant he understood its complexity more deeply and appreciation for nuance.
He also talked about the idolatry of general concepts. What was that about?
Basically, being wary of big, abstract terms. Question them. Ground your understanding in concrete facts and realities. Don't just worship the labels.
Interesting. And his core belief about well-being.
He pointed to the spirit of Jesus as the key to human well-being, the ultimate hope.
He also seemed aware of the limits of wealth.
Very much so. The most precious things aren't purchasable. And beyond a certain point, wealth can become a burden, a source of anxiety.
He noted Rockefeller's silence, too, when attacked.
Yeah, his habit was just not to respond to accusations or criticism publicly.
And finally, his view on human progress.
He saw it as this ongoing journey, getting ever closer to understanding the facts, the laws, the forces of nature. A fundamentally optimistic outlook, driven by knowledge.
So, reflecting on chapters in my life, it's really clear Frederick Taylor Gates offered, as he put it, amazing wisdom.
Yeah, and it really does go beyond just business or philanthropy. Insights for raising kids, relationships, just leading a more impactful life.
Indeed. So just to wrap up what we've covered, we looked at Gates's pretty amazing shift from ministry to finance and philanthropy.
Examined his very practical business principles, dug into his strategic, almost scientific approach to giving.
And considered his really thoughtful insights on personal growth and raising children.
A lot to chew on there.
Definitely. Which brings us to a final thought for you, our listener. Given Gates' strong emphasis on, evidence-based philanthropy and that relentless quest for knowledge to drive progress, how could we apply his core principles today?
Right. How might they help us tackle the challenges, seize the opportunities we face now to make a real, lasting, positive impact?
Or thinking about what he said about self-directed learning and critical thinking in kids.
Yeah, what practical steps could you take, maybe in your own life or with people around you, to actively nurture those qualities?
Good questions. We really encourage you to think about the wide-ranging wisdom Frederick Taylor Gates shared and how it might inform your own perspectives and maybe even your actions going forward.